Welcome back, everybody, to the Root to Bloom podcast, where we explore the fertile ground where creativity, culture, and social impact meet. Today, we are so honored to be joined by Divya Walia for a two-part segment where we'll be exploring what Divya learned about purpose in policy school, and secondly, measuring what matters and thinking about how to redefine impact based on her experience. Divya is a 2024 dual degree graduate of Columbia Business School and SIPA, where she focused on international economic policy. Divya first began her career as an investment analyst, advising ultra high net worth families and institutions, and later working in banking, supporting supervisory and policy functions. Divya is really committed to expanding global access to education for underserved communities, and I know that's a really big passion point for Divya. She's now working as a consultant in Dubai, and we at Root to Bloom were very, very fortunate to have her for a full year of collaboration where she provided exceptional strategic support across several of our partner projects. So we'll kick it off with part one, where we'll be speaking with Divya about what policy school taught her about purpose. Divya, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. It's so exciting, so very exciting to have you here and to just learn a little bit about your experience at SIPA and at Columbia Business School. And yeah, I just want to give you space to tell us a little bit about yourself. I know I gave the formal bio, but anything else you'd like to share about who you are?
Yes, so thank you for that intro. And I think the bio covers most of the professional aspect of it. I think what I just add is I grew up in Dallas, Texas. My parents are immigrated from India in the 80s, so I very much grew up in an Indian American community. And I feel like this concept of being a child of dual cultures really influenced the way that I grew up. So I studied Indian dance, but I also was in all of the musicals and did Western choir. And then I think this concept of global access to education also really came out of that. I was involved in educational nonprofits and initiatives in India. So I was actually raising funds in the US for a nonprofit that's based in India. And in so many other ways, I think that sort of background is what gave me the best of both worlds sort of mindset. I think that best of both worlds mindset, which is comes from the Disney Channel original TV series Hannah Montana, the best of both worlds mindset really continued throughout college, and also beyond. And I guess specifically in college, when I was thinking about what to study as an undergrad, I went to college in St. Louis. I was an international studies and economics double major, and I think that was the beginning of this theme that you'll see echo sort of throughout everything that I'm probably about to say, which is the split between quantitative and qualitative, and also really just using numbers and economics to ground an understanding of um, maybe more qualitative subjects like history, international relations, and global affairs. I always felt that having the sort of dual background and being sort of in both worlds would really bring out the best in me, but also allow me to bring my best to any environment that I was in.
Yeah, that's so incredible. And I like that thinking. I mean, as someone who also believes in an interdisciplinary approach, not only to studying, but also to life, but also to the arts. And it sounds like that is something you got really passionate about in undergrad. And I guess it carried over into grad school, perhaps. I mean, I'm kind of curious about that transition between undergrad and like being this third culture kid or dual culture kid and like navigating that and making sure both parts of yourself were present, that carrying over into education and then you going to college. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the link between that transition and then why you decided to go back to school, why you studied what you studied, and maybe how undergrad maybe influenced that perhaps.
For sure. It's a great question. So after college, I moved to New York City and I was working in finance, in banking, as you alluded to. So I was there for a few years, and while that experience was definitely very grounding, I think it forced me to dive further into my quantitative and maybe more number side. Obviously, that professional experience was super valuable. Getting access to, resources in terms of like the really smart people that I was around right out of college were super beneficial. But I did feel as I was coming up on like 3, 4 years that I felt a bit out of alignment with this core self, which again, the best of both worlds. I felt that I was leaning a bit too much into one world, and I didn't really feel like I was getting the chance to access that other part. So my interest in policy, the interest in international studies, I just that was such a big part of my undergraduate experience and what I was so passionate about in school. And I didn't feel that was reflected at all in my career at the time. So that's what sort of pushed me to go back to school. And actually, I was originally pursuing just an international affairs degree at SIPA. So SIPA is the policy school at Columbia. And my goal with that was sort of, again, to bring me more back into the policy world out of this experience in finance. And then during my first year at SIPA, I realized that having the MBA as well would also allow me to balance this by developing the pre-existing business and finance skills that I had gained before. So I applied to the business school, and then once I was accepted, I became a dual degree. So then I was in a dual program between SIPA and the business school. So again, then I felt like totally in balance. All parts of my intellectual curiosity were being satisfied. Every itch was being scratched. So yes, I was very grateful for that experience because again, I felt like it allowed me to develop both sides of myself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This resonates so much with me because I find myself to be very interdisciplinary in my approach to life and education and different things as well. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about trying to get the axis stable and this balance between, some might call the left brain and the right brain, or quant and qual, or interpretivism and positivism. I mean, depends on like how deep you want to go, but it sounds like doing this dual degree gave you an opportunity to do that. I am very curious though. Now I know that you graduated with your 2 degrees last year from Columbia, and now you've moved into another phase of life, consulting in um, even another country. I'm just curious too, you got those itches scratched and now you're in a new phase. Like, is it something that you still have to work at to maintain that balance of kind of just an interdisciplinary approach to work and life? Or do you feel like you got that itch scratched and it's okay? How's that playing out now?
Definitely. And to answer your question, it's definitely something that I continue to work out, continue to think about. Like I said, I think if at any given moment I want to achieve that balance. So if it can go one way or the other temporarily, but I think at the end of the day, having that balance throughout is always going to be super important to me. And I do feel like in this current position, I am getting that itch scratched. I think, firstly, I mean, consulting, at least the way that I'm doing it right now, it's quite generalist at the moment. So that allows me to sort of explore many different topics, which I really appreciate. And also, as you alluded to, I'm consulting abroad, so I'm not in the US. So I'm working with internationally based clients, and I'm also working on internet with teams that are very international, so people from all over the world. And I really do see in action then how that multidisciplinary approach just drives everything forward because having a diversity and not just culturally but also in the ways of thinking, so we all come from different places but we also have different backgrounds, we study different things, we have different ways of looking at the world. I feel like it's super beneficial. It definitely, I think, drives innovation in the sense that we're not uniform. So everyone has a different way of thinking, which means that ultimately whatever output we create brings the best from all of us. And yeah, and then I think also think just personally and professionally, it's always helpful to maintain that balance in the sense that, okay, if I don't feel like maybe in a given 6 month or whatever year period, work is going to scratch that intellectual itch for me, how can I find that outside? Whether it's like continuing to learn a language independently outside of work, or I mean, anything, just going to museums, exploring like the art scene, the performance scene, wherever I am, I feel like that also kind of helps with that balance. So, yes, definitely something that I continue to think about and work on.
It's a lifelong project, a commitment to living a balanced and multidisciplinary life, I think. And I'm hearing you say it requires a lot of intention. And I'm admiring how thoughtful you've been about that. It's so easy to be like, oh, back in the day, I used to study these five languages, or I used to study policy, and now I'm just doing something completely different. I think we really have to fight with a lot of intention to keep that alive. So I'm really admiring some of these tips and tricks you're giving around like if you're leaning far this way in your work life, try to bounce it in your personal life in this way, and kind of bringing it back around to work. I know now in the consulting experience you have at the moment, you're focusing, I believe, quite a bit with numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you work with data, and sometimes I feel that the numbers are numbers. They don't always tell us like the story. And I just wonder if and how you're able to bring that multidisciplinary thinking that's both quantitative and qualitative to looking at data, and how really can we balance data with empathy, or how do we balance the quant with the qual that is the story?
Yes, 100%. So I think definitely this question relates to many things that I learned in school across both policy school and business school, but also I think became quite clear when working with Root to Bloom, which was also an amazing opportunity to really think about this balance between, as you said, data and empathy. And what we know is obviously that data can be super powerful, in the sense that it can help us reveal patterns where maybe before we might not always be able to understand what causes what. So if we think about, what policies or initiatives can lead to certain social outcomes, economic outcomes, like data is the best way to do that. But obviously, and I think any statistician would tell you that data can also be fallible. Um, and like there's certain well-known statistical issues like correlation versus causation. So, just because the data might tell us that two variables are correlated, we don't actually know if one thing causes the other, or even things like sampling bias. So the sample that is used for a study, if it's not representative of like the full population, then the data isn't actually telling us what we think it is. And so I think this is where that qualitative focus and having empathy, and especially being able to understand cultural and social nuances, of whatever community or story that we're looking at, is especially important because it's only when you understand things at the personal and human level can the data underneath it truly become meaningful. And I think that's true across. I'm thinking of like everything in the sense of policy school, business school, root to bloom work, non-root to bloom work. It's like no one can just look at a bunch of charts. That's pretty meaningless for in most respects. There needs to be some sort of storytelling behind what it means. And in order to understand what it means, you need to be able to connect it to real human stories, with empathy and understanding. Because yes, it's that's really the thing that I think unlocks the potential when it comes to numbers and data is empathy.
Hmm, I hear you. And I do agree. Sampling bias is a huge issue. Correlation versus causation is a huge issue. And it can completely skew the way we look at and interpret and understand and synthesize data. And we don't want that. so, so yeah, you've given us some good visibility into how not to do that. But I'm curious for the practitioners out there, for those who study and measure impact, or who want to approach the data they read with more empathy. I wonder if you have any practical tips and tricks, or even with you and your current consulting work or in the past, like when you get a set of data, what's the first step to being empathetic? What's the first step to being thoughtful and not just reading it like a spreadsheet?
What I would say is that if I'm thinking about it from my perspective, and especially thinking about the work that we did with Root to Bloom, I would always take the time if we're given, for example, a set of numbers about what an organization did over the last year, take the time to really understand that organization. So look at the background of the founders, look at how many people are on the staff, try to read testimonials, so real human stories of people that the organization has worked with, whether it's through information that they themselves have given us or things on their social media. I think also just looking at pictures of, events or actual pictures from programs that these organizations have been running. I think that that in and of itself can really humanize something, right? Just like putting a picture to a bunch of numbers can help humanize the story behind it. And then also just thinking about, for example, if say we weren't thinking about a nonprofit, but we were thinking about a company, like a corporation, and a corporation has to publish their financial statements every quarter, basically to demonstrate the results of their work to their shareholders, which is somewhat similar with what nonprofits do with funders, if you can think about it that way. But some of the times, if you just look at the financial statements, you're not really going to get all the information, right? Like that's why there's analysts and so many people that actually like go through and try to figure out what certain numbers mean. Maybe if profits are down, say in a certain quarter, it might not be that the business is actually doing that. It could be that they've just put a lot of money into investing into a certain product or in upskilling their workforce. So, all that to say is that no matter the context, just having numbers is never going to be enough. So, whatever that means in terms of actually doing the background and understanding what's behind the numbers, I think that's always the best place to start.
The numbers, just having the numbers is never going to be enough. Okay, that is a sound bite. That was really, really, it hit differently. Yeah. So thank you for sharing how we can balance quantitative data with empathy and thoughtfulness. I'm curious on the flip side, just as we wrap up and thinking about your learnings at SEPA, how can knowing or having a sense about policy and business frameworks can support purpose-driven leaders to act strategically, not just passionately. So in other words, we looked at how we need to balance quantitative data. How can these more qualitative frameworks perhaps support us as we move towards real world implementation and strategy for nonprofits that want to say better, global access to education?
Definitely. So I think with anything, it's, always use everything to your advantage, right? So for purpose-driven leaders, like using numbers or using frameworks can really be an edge. Um, and thinking about things like theory of change or understanding how certain policies work, really, if purpose-driven leaders, they have that knowledge, if they can find a way to articulate that when they speak to funders, I think that's probably, the best way to sort of use that strategically. So I think it's pairing the passion that, nonprofit leaders, purpose-driven leaders have with strategically using these frameworks is all just, it's, I think, everything to do with positioning it in a way where it can be seen as a value add. And one thing that I noticed as well from, again, working with Root to Bloom, but also working with other organizations, is that it seemed like organizations that sort of incorporated things like impact measurement and carefully tracking outcomes, so things like program participation or reach, if those were incorporated in the beginning, so that as programs actually kicked off and people got busy doing the actual work, these things were kind of almost running in autopilot. It made the process of articulating the value at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, which most of the time the value was huge, but if you couldn't articulate it, it almost became like difficult to make the case. But if those processes and that way of thinking is implemented at the beginning, and sort of like in an underlying way, it can make everything, I think, easier in terms of demonstrating impact and demonstrating value.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Divya, for this really balanced approach to thinking about multidisciplinary thinking, but also thinking about how that can then have real world implications for purpose leaders, how it can have real world implications for even funders, right? Reading data, reading reports, and bringing empathy like on all sides of the equation. So this concludes our segment on what policy school, and I'd also probably say B school, taught Divya about purpose. Divya, thank you so much for reminding us that purpose isn't just a feeling. Purpose is shaped by so many factors, by how we read systems, the way we read numbers, the way we understand or misunderstand people or communities, and essentially how we navigate complexity with a lot of intention. So I wanted to just say a big thank you for bringing your multidisciplinary lens, and kind of a lot of embodied work experience, actually doing this work. So I just wanted to say thank you so much. Now, let me ask you, where can folks follow up, or if they have a question or wanted to stay connected in any way? What would be the best way to do that?
For sure. I would say LinkedIn. If, anyone, feel free to reach out and connect on LinkedIn, drop me a message, happy to chat. So you can find me on LinkedIn under my name. So that's Divya, Divya, Walia, Walia. And hopefully you'll be able to find me because Columbia is the dual degree is written in the my LinkedIn sort of bio. So hopefully I'll be easy to find. And yes, happy to connect.
Thanks a ton, Divya. And to our community listening in, we are always so grateful that you're on this journey with us. Please always remember you can find us online at roottobloom.org or follow along on IG at We Are Root to Bloom. We're also on LinkedIn at Root to Bloom. Stay tuned until next time, and we'll see you for this second part of the two-part series with Divya Walia.